Did you know that people living with schizophrenia are 4 times more likely to be the victims of violent crime than to be the ones to commit that violent crime? And yet, most of us associate schizophrenia with someone being dangerous. This is just one of the many misconceptions about schizophrenia that fuels the stigma around it, making it harder for those living with the illness to just live their lives, to get the help that they deserve, and to feel seen as people. Today, I'm here to break down the 5 biggest misconceptions about schizophrenia and the truth that everyone needs to hear so that we can be better advocates and supporters for those dealing with the illness. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the And Also podcast. I'm your host, Madison, and if this is your first time tuning in, this podcast is all about grief, mental health, and dealing with mental illness, essentially. If you're new here, in 2022, I lost my ex-partner of 6 years to suicide as a result of a case of schizophrenia. Now, Regis and I had spent our entire teenage years into our adulthood dating and being best friends, and he ended his life after a long battle with the mental illness. And ever since then, I've kind of made it my mission to, one, advocate for those who are dealing with mental illness, especially stigmatized mental illness, to educate and, spread awareness about schizophrenia. But also I wanted to create a space for people that are grieving any sort of loss to feel seen, to hear stories, and to share stories. So if this is your first time here, thank you for being here, and I hope you stick around. But first, let's get into our drink of the day. I want to get into these 5 myths, but before we do that, of course, I'm going to share with you what I'm drinking during today's episode. And you guys, I'm actually making a live concoction, okay? This has been my favorite drink in the past few weeks. I've been absolutely obsessed with it. And don't even ask how I came up with it. It was an accident. The first ingredient is the GT's kombucha. This is the lemon berry flavor. So I'm going to pour this in my cup. And I'm going to top it off with the Trader Joe's Power of Purple juice. This combo is everything. This is so good. I'm so obsessed. I love mixing my carbonated drinks with something that's not carbonated just to help cut down on the carbonation. That's my drink. I'm obsessed with it. I am obsessed with kombucha mostly because I'm trying to clear up my skin, and I've heard that pre and probiotics help a lot with clearing the skin. So I don't know. I figured I would try, and lo and behold, my skin has been improving. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about the 5 biggest misconceptions about schizophrenia. And this topic obviously hits close to home for me, and as someone who's spent a lot of time advocating for mental illness and fighting the stigma, especially around mental illnesses that are deemed as scary or shown in the media as being violent and aggressive. I've just seen how these sorts of stigmas can impact someone's ability to get help and how it hurts real people living with schizophrenia. So let's just get into these 5 misconceptions and give you the actual truth. Let's get started with misconception number 1. People with schizophrenia are violent or dangerous. Many people assume that those with schizophrenia are aggressive, unpredictable, violent, dangerous, and the truth is, people living with severe mental illness like schizophrenia are more likely to have crime committed against them than to be the perpetrator of violent crime. I had seen this personally with Regis. As his illness got worse, he pulled himself back a lot more. He separated himself from his loved ones a lot more because what he had perceived to be going on in his mind, he did not want others to be impacted by that, and he wanted to protect us from it. And whether or not we think it's real or whatever, he, in his mind, his reality was his reality. In his mind, his hallucinations, his paranoia, that was very real for him. And, us on the outside, we could say all we want, oh my God, that's not really happening. But at the end of the day, in his mind, it is happening. And so he did a lot to kind of protect his loved ones on the outside of his mind from those things. The National Alliance on Mental Illness reported that only about 3 to 5% of violent acts are committed by individuals with severe mental illness. And quite frankly, if you ask me, whenever a crime is committed and someone tries to plead insanity and they're very clearly not dealing with this sort of mental illness, it actually deeply pisses me off because that further stigmatizes those who actually are dealing with the mental illness, and it makes us, on the outside kind of think that this is normal behavior for people with schizophrenia when it's not the truth. This misconception exists mostly because of what we see in the media and how those with schizophrenia are portrayed, and then the confirmation bias that happens in the real world isolated from these movies and whatnot. TV shows and movies have so often, for literally all of time, portrayed people with schizophrenia as unstable, as dangerous, as people that we should fear. And then when isolated incidents actually do occur in the real world involving someone with schizophrenia, they're heavily publicized and they create that distorted perception that we have seen time and time again in Hollywood. So here's the truth. People with schizophrenia often struggle with paranoia, with hallucinations, or delusions, but these symptoms usually make them fearful and withdrawn, not necessarily aggressive. They're living in fear of the things going on in their mind. I saw someone I love live this out every single day. And you're watching them from the outside, completely rooted in this version of reality, right? And watching someone you love have these sorts of hallucinations and delusions, it is so hard to see them living in fear and being paranoid and being afraid. Like, it's so awful. And if you only could see how people living with schizophrenia are interacting with the world around them, you would very quickly understand that they're not necessarily a threat, at least in most cases. Now, of course, there are isolated incidents, like I said. And there are so many people, too, that live very normal, everyday lives with a mental illness like schizophrenia. So I think, we have to understand that you could know somebody that is living with schizophrenia and have no idea because they are taking their medication, they are doing treatment. I think we have to get this idea out of our heads that they're just these violent, scary people that need to be locked away and, throw away the key, because it's just not the case. When we perpetrate this myth of danger and fear, we not only isolate individuals with schizophrenia, but we also prevent them from getting help. And we also isolate the people that are their main support system because they don't feel like they can talk about it and share what they're going through, which further prevents their loved ones from getting help. The truth is that they need support and love and compassion and empathy and not fear. Misconception number 2, schizophrenia means that someone has a split personality. Many people confuse schizophrenia with dissociative identity disorder, or DID, thinking it involves multiple personalities and switching. Schizophrenia is not about multiple personalities at all. I don't know how many times I have to say this, y'all. It's a brain disorder that affects how people perceive the reality around them. It leads to symptoms like hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. The term schizophrenia comes from the Greek words meaning split mind, which refers to a split from reality, not personality. These key symptoms include hallucinations, hearing or seeing things that aren't there, delusions, fixed false beliefs, and cognitive impairments, not DID traits like alternate identities, identity versus reality, okay? People with schizophrenia are not switching to a different identity. They are still, themselves, just living in a shifted reality or perceived reality. I think also this kind of goes back to the media creating these unrealistic tropes of characters. So they often conflate schizophrenia and DID to create like such dramatic, unrealistic characters with illnesses that don't necessarily exist in the way that we actually know them based on psychology. So what is the truth here? Schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder focused on distorted perception, while DID is a trauma-based condition characterized by separate identities. People with schizophrenia might hear voices or have delusions about being stalked, monitored, followed, but they don't switch between personas. So here's the key takeaway, y'all. Clarifying the difference between schizophrenia and DID is so important to reduce the stigma around both mental illnesses so that we can create an understanding and know how to recognize the signs of both of these things, and not to say that DID and schizophrenia, like one is worse or better than the other. All I'm saying is if we properly understand the mental illnesses that exist that we know about, we can better support each other and we can better build community around uplifting those who are struggling. Misconception number 3, and I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, people with schizophrenia can't lead normal lives. So the myth is that a schizophrenia diagnosis literally means it's the end of the world. It means someone can't work, someone can't build relationships or live independently. This is not the case. People living with schizophrenia with the proper treatment can lead very fulfilling, successful, accomplished lives, and they can just live lives where they're happy, where they're okay. So the World Health Organization, unfortunately, that the US is no longer a part of, fuck you, Trump, reports that 50 to 70% of people living with schizophrenia improve significantly with consistent treatment. That's not to say that achieving consistent treatment is easy. It's a hard thing to do, especially in today's world, and I want to acknowledge that because we have to understand early intervention and specialized care is very inaccessible in a country that does not provide universal health care and that is dealing with a very broken system when it comes to helping people that are different. We have been absolute pros at criminalizing mental illness. And I want to be very, very clear here. Coming from somebody who lost a loved one to suicide due to schizophrenia, one thing I don't play around about is criminalizing people with mental illness, making people feel ashamed about getting help, making people feel like the only option is to take their own lives, because that should never be the reality for anybody. If somebody needs help, if somebody needs therapy, if somebody needs to speak to a psychiatrist and get on the proper medication or get a proper evaluation and diagnosis, it should not be a 6-month process, period. And if you think it should, you better be damned the day that you have a loved one dealing with something like this and you're waiting 6 months for an appointment and you see them declining. Imagine if it was the same way for a cancer diagnosis. Oh, your child has cancer? Sorry, we can't get you in to see the oncologist for 6 months. It'll have to wait. Do you know what can happen in those 6 months? A lot. It's the same with your brain, okay? So let's get a grip on reality and understand mental illness deserves to be treated the same way as any physical illness, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you disagree, girl, I don't know what to tell you. So I do want to acknowledge that as important as treatment is, it's not easily accessible for most people, especially if they don't have health insurance, and especially if they are in a state of psychosis. Getting treatment, it's not easy. We tried with Regis so many times, and here we are, 2 years later, here I am on a grief podcast talking about him in past tense. I do blame a lot of that on the failing mental health system. He was not given the proper care, access, and attention that he deserved. And I see so many people dealing with that. So that's why we're here today. That's why we're talking about this stuff. Because the more that we know as a population, the better care we can expect from providers and the more expectations that we can have. So to get back on topic here, early intervention programs such as coordinated specialty care have shown that young people diagnosed with schizophrenia can return to work and school and social activities. There are so many people that have thrived despite their schizophrenia diagnosis, and I don't want anyone to ever feel that this diagnosis is a death sentence, because it doesn't have to be. And it doesn't have to be, especially if we have the proper things in place. So many people feel like this sort of diagnosis is the end of the world. And I totally understand how it can shake things. It can be scary. It can be uncertain. You could fear for your future in your life or your loved one's future. But there are so many modern treatments and the potential for recovery and to live a good life. The truth is, the recovery is possible with medication therapy and community support. If we keep discriminating against people living with schizophrenia and other stigmatized mental illnesses, they will not get the support needed to be as able to recover. It takes a village to support anyone dealing with any sort of illness to get better. And the same goes for mental illness. So lack of access to care and stigma are two huge reasons. Honestly, these could feel like bigger obstacles than the disorder itself. Because if we allowed people to just stigma-free, get the help that they needed, and not have so many barriers to getting help, we would be so much better off as a society. A diagnosis does not define somebody's future, okay? With the right resources, people with schizophrenia can live such incredible lives. Misconception number 4. Schizophrenia is caused by bad parenting. So this outdated as hell belief blames parents, particularly mothers, because sexism, patriarchy, for their child's schizophrenia. The truth is that schizophrenia is caused by a myriad of factors. It could be genetic, biological, environmental, not necessarily parenting, okay? There has yet to be a sort of discovery on whether schizophrenia is genetic or if it's caused by trauma, experience, environmental factors. We have seen so many families, like the Galvin family. They had 12 children, and I believe 5 or 6 of the 12 children all had schizophrenia or some sort of psychotic mental illness. That can sort of show amongst many other families that there might be some sort of genetic link. But I think also environmental factors have been a huge uptick in question. We don't really know the cause, right? There's also like substance use can lead to mental illness developing. We all kind of know the whole like hallucinogenic drugs like LSD and mushrooms can lead to early onset of things like bipolar disorders, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorders. So it's kind of a question as to, each case is so different, and we can't just say, oh, you're a bad mother, you're a bad father, so your kid has schizophrenia. Like, it's so much deeper than that. There's so much research that is yet to be done. So genetic studies show that if you have a parent with schizophrenia, your risk is increased by 10%. Your brain chemistry, abnormal dopamine production could be a link to someone's reason for having schizophrenia. And then it could even just be complications during birth or pregnancy, exposure to viruses, or even, like I said, drug use or abuse. I think with a mental illness such as schizophrenia, people often just want to be able to blame something for the why. When you see someone you love dealing with an illness like this, you just want to know why. Why did this happen to my loved one? Why did this happen to me? And so fingers can be pointed in moments like that. It's the same with suicide. You lose a loved one to suicide and everyone is quick to be like, oh, well, this person did this, so that could be why. But blaming each other for these sorts of things only adds shame and prevents that person from seeking help, and also makes that person feel like a burden, makes everyone feel like a burden. So instead of pointing fingers at each other, let's just be supportive of one another, because there are better things that we could be spending our time on when it comes to these sorts of situations. Okay, misconception number 5, schizophrenia can't be treated. Many people believe that this is a hopeless life sentence of a diagnosis with zero effective treatment. Now, I just want to give a little shout out to the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance, because I have learned so much about schizophrenia through this organization. They do so much research around schizophrenia. They have resources for those who are dealing with the illness, those who are just diagnosed with the illness. It's something you should check out. It's always linked in my description box. So, give it a little gander, give it a little donation, whatever you got to do. And like we've said a million times, schizophrenia, it's not curable, but it is treatable with the right interventions and support. Medications like antipsychotic medications effectively reduce the hallucinations and delusions in those dealing with the illness. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, helps to improve the social functioning and to kind of curb and support someone when they're actively dealing with delusions. Studies estimate that around 25% of those living with schizophrenia recover completely, while 50% see significant improvement. It's almost like hard for me to even say that out loud because it's so unsettling to know that like Regis could have had a different outcome here. But I don't want anyone else to be in our shoes, you know. I don't want anyone else to wind up where Regis did, and it just really sucks. So I think once again, it comes down to stigma. It comes down to the lack of education and awareness. People don't know. People only hear about untreated cases. People only hear about, you know, those who wind up homeless, those who wind up in and out of treatment facilities. You know, they can't find the right support. You only hear about those major cases that make the news because a violent crime occurred. You don't hear about the people who wake up every day, take their medication, and go to work and live with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is treatable and recovery is possible. Education, compassion, and access to care make all the difference. And I just wanted to say that the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance has an entire page on their website. It'll be linked below. It always is under Diagnosed Person Resources. It's currently a 2-part plan for what to do when you're diagnosed with schizophrenia and all the resources. It's kind of like a toolkit for those who are diagnosed. Part 3 is coming soon, which talks more about making a crisis plan if a crisis happens while someone is in psychosis. That this is such a wonderful, wonderful resource that I wish I knew about when Regis was still here. But I'm so grateful that something like this exists today, and that there are resources and that there are ways where those who are struggling can reach out and get help. Because I want people to understand that schizophrenia is not a death sentence. It is not an end of life diagnosis. You can get better. You can live a normal life. And there is still hope no matter what. So I just want you to know that there are resources that exist. We just broke down 5 of the most common misconceptions about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia does not define a person. It's just one part of who they are. It's one part of their story, but it is not their entire story. And I say this with Regis all the time. Regis was so much more than just someone living with schizophrenia. He was the most talented artist you could have ever witnessed in your life. It was such a blessing to see the things he created. He painted this Edward Scissorhands that's behind me. He was the most hysterical person I've ever met. He had the coolest fashion ever. He literally taught me all I know about fashion. He lived life on his own terms. He lived such a full, incredible, amazing, fun life. He just was a one-of-a-kind person, and I wish I could just like translate in words who he was outside of his mental illness. But words for that don't exist because he was just unlike anybody I've ever met. And I'm so thankful that I got to witness him in the way that I did. I couldn't be more grateful for that. When we educate ourselves and approach schizophrenia with compassion, with love, and any mental illness, right? We just create a safer and more supportive world for the people living with these illnesses to be there in the way that we would want someone to be there for us. If this episode resonated with you, please be sure to share it with someone who you think needs to hear this information. Let's keep spreading awareness and education around schizophrenia and other stigmatized mental illnesses. Oh, and before I go, I wanted to give you a mental health update. As you guys know, I did finish my sessions with SHEA, but I am doing some additional sessions outside of our 8-week program because there's a couple of things in my life that I just really wanted to still work on after those 8 weeks. So I just wanted to give you guys an update on the work that we've still been doing together in the past few weeks. I have been really happy with the foundation I've been able to build around my own mental health. I don't know. I feel like I've built such a great foundation for being able to navigate hard situations and support myself in so many new ways. So the next thing I wanted to kind of work on was my career and how I'm going to implement all the things that I learned into building the life that I want for myself. And so our last few sessions have been focused on career and building a sustainable and enjoyable life for myself. So this past week, we set a bunch of goals of things I wanted to do for my career. And first of all, one thing I really wanted to do is reach out to some funeral homes that are close to me and just have conversations with the funeral directors there and get a feel for how they do things and just, finding new connections and mentors in the industry. So that is one thing that I have been working on and I have done, which is awesome. And then the other thing was reaching out to new clients for my full-time job, my business. I run a digital media company full-time. I edit podcasts. I edit videos for YouTubers and podcasters. I create social media content. I'm a videographer, blah, blah, blah. So I do so much for so many different companies. And I wanted to find some new clients for 2025 and just kind of reevaluate my current work that I'm doing and find meaningful work. So it's been really cool to kind of develop a plan with SHEA on what I want the next few months of my life to look like and the goals I'm setting for myself. And it's been super helpful to have someone to bounce these ideas off of and, just bring to life the reality that I really want to be living in. So yeah, I do know a few of you have actually reached out to SHEA and have booked sessions with her, and that makes me so happy. And her information is always in the description box. So huge thank you to SHEA for all she's done to support me and just my self-worth journey, honestly. I feel like the biggest takeaway I've had from working with SHEA is how much I'm actually worth. Not in a monetary sense, not in any other sense, but like intrinsically, I am worth so much. I'm worth having the things that I want to have in life. I am worth taking rest time for. I am worth the love I want to give myself. And yeah, I think that's just such a priceless thing. So resources to find SHEA are always linked in the description box. And let's cue the outro. A huge thank you to everyone who tuned in to today's episode. I know I got a little emotional here at the end, but this is a topic that really does mean so much to me because if I had the information that I have now back then when Regis was still here, I could have supported him in so many ways that I wasn't able to. So I just want to be a resource for the things I wish I knew back then for other people today. And I hope that you found education and information in this that helps you in your life journey. And if you don't know anyone with schizophrenia, at least you know how to help someone if the day ever comes where you need to help someone. Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. Links and resources are always in the description box if you need them. And I'm always here to talk. If you want to reach me on Instagram @andalsopod, you can send me a DM. And thank you guys so much for watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or Apple. And make sure you subscribe, like, download, rate the show, all the things. And I will talk to you guys in my next episode. I love you so, so much. And thank you again for listening today.